Hey, welcome to Living the Dream with MS. Today I'm going to tell my MS story. A lot of people have asked me for the full story so that they either know more personally or because they're interested in finding out if some of the things they've been dealing with make it so that MS should be on the list of things that are being considered with their health issues. So here we go. I was somebody that's frequently injured. Just clumsy and hurt. So football, I had injuries. I had a lot of injuries just from sports and other things. In 1994, I was working for BJ's installing tires and injured my back. That's when kind of this whole thing got started. I noticed weakness and numbness in my right leg. I re-injured it again in 95 and dealt with the symptoms on and off. I had 3 orthopedic surgeons that were willing to do spinal fusion surgery because they felt like the spinal damage was what was causing the weakness and numbness in the leg. Finally, I went to an orthopedic surgeon who was much more thorough and determined that it was not that injury in my back that was causing the weakness and numbness, but he said it's neuro. He said, I don't know what it is neuro, but it's neuro. So I went to a neurosurgeon. The neurosurgeon wasn't exactly sure what it was. So he sent me to a traditional neurologist. The traditional neurologist started doing a very deep family history, which included my maternal grandmother having MS. He did a MRI. He did a needle EMG, where they stick needles into the nerves and check the electrical conductivity of the nerves. He did visual evoked response, where they basically put goggles on you and they put electrodes on you and they measure the impulses in your brain from the things that you're taking in. After all of that, I was given a diagnosis of probable MS. Why not definitive MS? Well, because if you don't have a positive MRI for plaques, they put it as probable MS. However, that doesn't mean it's not. It means that they couldn't see the plaques. They could be deeper in the brain, the spinal area. They could be in a spot that's just not showing up on the image. But everything else pointed to MS, and that's how we treated it. As things went on into 99, 2000, it went from weakness and numbness in the leg to a complete drop foot on the right leg, where I had no control over it. I used to have to wear an AFO, ankle foot orthotic, that kept my foot from dragging. Which made driving difficult, a lot of things. I also started my first MS drug, Avonex, which made my heat sensitivity through the roof. I never wanted to go outside. Had to overcome a horrible fear of needles because Avonex is a once weekly intramuscular injection, which was traumatic until I got used to it. I've since been through all 3 of the ABC drugs, Avonex, Betaseron, and Copaxone. I would get what looked like a stroke. I would get the whole right side of my body would be gone. I'd have Bell's palsy. I would have the weakness and numbness in the right arm, the right leg. I had 2 hospitalizations of over a week where I basically had to relearn how to walk, how to hold a fork, all those kinds of different things because the extent of the flare-ups. And that's how it was working back then, was flare-ups. I'd have an attack, then it would go away. I'd have an attack, and then it would go away. We settled on Copaxone, and for some years, probably about almost 10 years, that worked. I would get maybe a flare-up or 2 a year instead of 4 or 5 a year when it first began, and the severity was less. But what I noticed as that end of that 10 years, about 5 years ago, came up, the attacks were going away, but symptom permanency was starting to stay. They, in the meantime, had shipped me off to Brigham and Women's, and I was evaluated for mitochondrial disease. Their neurology expert said, no, this is MS. So I understand the probable MS diagnosis. This is multiple sclerosis. But now the fatigue was lasting longer. The neuro pain in the legs was a permanent thing. I could treat it, but it was a permanent thing. I was a little bit more weak, but I wasn't having these frequent attacks. So I went back in and saw my neurologist, and we evaluated some things and said, no, really, you've changed from relapsing remitting MS to secondary progressive MS, which I've talked about in other videos. The Copaxone started to work a little bit less because it's really approved. The whole point of it is for relapsing remitting MS. And I tried a lot of things to manage the nerve pain. I tried a medication called Baclofen, which is an anti-rigidity, anti-seizure medication. There was a period of time where I used Ultram, which is a watered-down opioid, but an opioid nonetheless. And that didn't work great, but it worked better than other things. And then finally, a few years ago, I got learned about the proper usage of medical cannabis, and that's where I've been able to manage my pain from then. So that's kind of how things have gone. Started with the back. There were a lot of orthopedic surgeons that thought that it was structural and that they could fix it. And the progression of the disease from relapsing remitting to secondary progressive. I've talked about many of the symptoms and that sort of thing, but I wanted to give you the background on where that came from. So this experience all started at age 21, diagnosis at age 24. I am now age 40. And I can keep plugging away. I know what the disease does. I know what the symptoms are. I know how to manage them for the most part. Hopefully this has enlightened some people on things that they've experienced. Or if you're just wondering how things went for me, now you know. That is it for today, and I'm going to keep living the dream with MS.